Hello and welcome to Newsnight, where we speak to major league players in Nigeria's development process and tackle governance and ways of improving its processes. I'm Ladi Akeredoluale. Thanks for joining us. The long-awaited and demanded reshuffle at the top of the nation's armed forces has now taken place, with the president naming new leaders for the Army, Air Force, and Navy. But with the continuing security challenges facing the nation, as exemplified by the very recent kerfuffle in Ondo and Oyo states, how much difference can the security forces make in tackling the problem? A novel approach which seeks to make all stakeholders drive towards justice, equity, and fair play is recommended by my guest today. Newsnight talks to former Army commander and one-time Federal Commissioner for Information, Major General Ibrahim Haruna. General, thank you so much for your time. Welcome to the program.
Good evening.
Now, security, insecurity, security challenges, those are English words describing more or less the same thing, which is that people don't feel safe. They don't feel safe to move. They don't feel safe to have their loved ones move. And particularly in northern Nigeria now, right across the north, from Niger State to Zamfara and Kebbi to Kaduna, and then, of course, the long-standing trouble in the northeast, which has gotten worse. What are you hearing? What's your take of what has happened between 2019, 2020, and 2021?
I think that a starting point would be that it is in the context of the preservation of national security, national steadfastness, national development, national cohesion, and objectivity that the nation sets for itself. So from this perspective, you can pass some critical judgment on issues that have arisen and nature and character of criminality that has arisen to cause insecurity to the general populace. Let's say in our time, the political foundation for major insecurity then was political, and it was the politics of power sharing between the constituents of the federation. It was then said to be a three-legged regional Nigerian state that was sharply divided by the various peoples due to their culture, their background, and the nature of their own internal social economic dispositions. But coming down the line after the 1966 coup, which was the aftermath and result of the internal politicking and lack of fusion or lack of coherence of the political class that emerged after the colonial transition to independence, and then the transition from independence headed by the head of the Commonwealth to our own internal full expression of sovereignty with our own president appointed, and those are the hem of affairs who are being elected. So the internal politics and search for unity, for development, brought about heated relationships. Of course, these were bound to happen because there were conflicting interests, variety of interests, which could not be consolidated into a major axis for social and economic development. So any development plan or choices was inherently conflictual because it appeared there is a denial to a party and there was an advantage being taken by the other, and development in conflict did not guarantee the achievement of the aims of objectives of the plan of development, or even in its administration. And policies were at most times pursued in a breach. Each party perhaps takes advantage to execute that which will appear more feasible for its own sectional or regional interests. This has not been reduced by the fact that we entered into years, not just the Civil War, but years of intense competition after the Civil War. That competition looked as if it was rationally and soberly being pursued. However, a new craze came into the dynamics of development, and this craze was corruption, the desire to perpetuate the wealth of individuals and of groups according to how they are identified in the class society of Nigeria or the advantaged elites of Nigeria. So this new craze of corruption overshadowed every rational intent for growing a developed, united, moral Nigerian society and Nigerian state. And I think that all these are background to what is exploding today in forms of criminality. This criminality has emerged from the sense that people have had. And that is the sense that there is no equity, there is no justice, there is corruption, and there is prevalent discrimination based on features or characters that did not make the blockworks of the Nigerian people cohere and become strong. So are weaker and getting much more weaker because the security that should have arisen out of a purposeful binding of the various people and their interests has not been pursued faithfully, justiciably, or equitably. So I think we are not really facing challenges which we have not created, and we are not facing challenges that do not exist in other nation states. The issue is how do we comprehend it, how do we perceive it, and what measures we take either in the immediate short term, in the medium term, or in the long term, and how we mobilize the people generally to support the policies in their various phases so that the ultimate in the time scale can be achieved.
At that point, General, let me just jump in and ask you what you mentioned now. How do we perceive it? How do we look at it? And how do we seek to go about tackling it? The most current, the most recent of those challenges have seen various parts of the country take different approaches. Some have talked about increasing the firepower of the military forces, as well as the police, as well as their number. Others have talked about devolving those functions to local levels, so you have things like community policing. Some call them forest rangers, others call them other names. There's Amotekun in the southwest, which is essentially a form of community policing as well. And then there are others who are saying bring in technology into the mix. As someone who has been deeply involved, your career was entirely in the military before you went on to become a lawyer. Do you think these various steps are all headed in the right direction?
Well, there are various strategies and tactics designed, but they are not all designed with the same objectives in mind. They are so segmented, with the result that even in implementation, you find that each one had its own limited goals, and therefore there is no real synergy, there's no real cooperation, except for the attainment of each other's short-term goals. Again, one finds as a result, since there are no common objectives, there is no synergy, there's no cooperation, whatever costs and finances that is incurred solves little for all, if any, and that it only compounds the direction of the efforts that is required for the major assault that is needed, so that there is a common belonging to attaining the foreseeable good well-being, for the people generally. Again, one finds that historically, every community or tribe or even family have security notions. Since we were chased out of either the jungle or the grassland, you will find places that are now calling for recognition as tourist caves, because people had caves they could run to. People had plans should they be attacked either by animals or by other tribes and adventurers. They had a notion of how to keep themselves together and minimize the depopulation caused by the nature of the insecurity that has come to them. Now, again, in our history, we see that the colonialists came. In some places, it was with whiskey or corabis, and then guns and so on, to fight for what perhaps they did not expect, the nature of victory they will get, but they knew that in the 1880s, they were motivated and propelled to capture not just people, but territory. They were after people before for slavery, but now they were after territory so that they could expand their sovereignty, their power, their economy at home, not in the territories they were conquering. And being the nations that were wiser or more foreseeing how to meet their needs to fuel their new industrial evolution. 1835 or so, this conference they had,
The Berlin Conference?
the Berlin Conference.
1885.
Yeah, it has 1885. And of course, the chartered companies, UAC, and the West African Frontier Force, all those people, Lagos Constabulary, they were used by these business charter companies to acquire territory, which enabled the Europeans in Berlin to decide which territory goes to Germany, to Britain, to France. So the nature of security then was upheld for the people by the traditional system. And they were able to hold their grounds and enter agreements for security. There was no really questions of how much was the chartered UAC company, Unilever or whatever, were paying the soldiers, how they were clothed, the logistics. They brought the arms, the ammunition, and the logistics, and they were able to move forward to fight our own caliphate army, for example, and got a treaty, out of them. So what I'm trying to underline here is that what is the cardinal objectives that is aimed and pursued by the Nigerian leadership in commerce, in industry, and in politics. If they are not clearly defined by those who are leading the Nigerian state will continue to be in pockets of ambivalent objectives and self-defeating contests, which can be identified or classified as tribal or ethnic, the privileged elite in various sectors, educational sector, military sector, so on and so forth. I think we always should look at the context in which this criminality that is expressing itself in the Nigerian political and social class, what is it about, and why has it come to be the way it is? Now, as a soldier and chief ordnance officer of those days, we knew we had the records of all armaments from the point of import to registration in the various depots and subsequently in the various armories. But we lost that control during the Civil War. And that control partially exists for all properly imported and distributed arms. Having lost that, we have not gotten back the control because small arms in particular has been smuggled into the country by various ways, by various import points, whether they are by sea or through the desert and so on. And it has been worsened, not only that the war in Libya, the insurrection against Gaddafi, and the consequent results, and of course the desire of the resurgence of the old empires that were in the hands of the nomadic tribes and trade routes coming through the desert and going southwards, has been rekindled because there is a sense of ambition that Nigeria is still a powerful resource base, is still open, and migration can fill it up, whether properly in accordance with the international rules for migration, for citizenship, and so on and so forth. So it has led to some conflict, serious conflict, and serious criminality. More so when you realize that the Nigerian state has not gotten a firm control of these security points, like immigration, like customs, like citizenry, registration for rights to vote, and so on and so forth. When you don't have control over this, and then it is impacted by the elements of corruption and self-enrichment, then you lose control. You lose control because you have no control in determining individuals' wealth or in ensuring that wealth contributes to the growth of wealth by people paying the appropriate tax and by the bureaucracy making sure they're properly accounted and this accounting is transparent. So we've lost control. I was shocked some time ago to discover that reports have been made that certain Nigerian institutions had not provided their audited accounts for over, say, 40 years. It wasn't possible then, because every year the accounts were presented for the Public Accounts Committee in Parliament. They are looked at, and they are examined also in the context of budget preparation and so on. But I think through the civil war and through the various creations of different units of the federation as states or local government, that important part of accountability and transparency to the public, had been lost. Again, I think the state lost even the powers to question the emergence of individual wealth, which was and is still demonstrated by developments far beyond the capacity or the earning power of the citizens who are putting up such edifices. So it's a matter of control, and I think understanding how it works for the growth and development of states, it has easily been blamed on the leadership. Yes, the leadership take a blame if they don't take the kind of decisions that will reverse that kind of development. it will not necessarily reverse it if the society and the public generally are not involved and they are not part of it. Because we have seen in the Ghana coups, in fact, some people were being killed only to demonstrate that the killing was broad-based. But years after the liberation of the state, we found that in recent times, we have had reports of corruption of even people in the judicial system. So it is the leadership at the end of the day and the commitment to what they have promised to do for the people, for people to be convinced to vote for them in this experiment of evolving a democratic political culture.
That gives you a completely different complexion, doesn't it, when we are talking about Boko Haram? Because Boko Haram, by all indications, is essentially now a foreign import. The narrative that you have talked about, does it apply in that kind of situation?
Of course, it's like the pandemic we are having now. It starts small, then it starts coming in different strains. When Yusuf was killed in the police by the police at the police station, it was very evident.
You are referring to Mohammed Yusuf, the initial leader of Boko Haram.
The initial Boko Haram priest who was working in concert with a powerful group in government. So it was part of its evolution that they are now being backed, maybe funded and supported by foreign agents who see the advantage in keeping them on the throat of the Nigerian security system and the Nigerian government, because they also have their objectives. They don't believe that literacy or education is a sin or is a crime. The first revelation to Prophet Muhammad, peace be unto him, was read, Iqra, read, seek for knowledge, and is embedded in the philosophy of the Islamic religion. Learning is perpetual. From the cradle to the grave, you must be learning. And they are taking advantage of people of learning have created. So it's that you may say it is part of the failures of the Nigerian state to impact discipline on its people and commitment to its national philosophy. There are many criminals today who are powerful, very influential, because the position of the state to infuse and impact national discipline on them and responsibility has been allowed to wither away.
So you think that Boko Haram
could have been nipped in the bud?
That's the point I was
Yeah, the point is that it could have been nipped in the bud. But people got away whatever they thought was best for them to do without the state taking a strong position. After all, we talk about criminality. Criminality is what has been assigned by the state as a state offense. Not just a crime against the person or persons, but against the state.
The state, yes.
So the state is charged to take the appropriate steps, which may include going to war. You know? But there should be justice in the system. There should be a procedural justice in the system. There must be value justice in the system. You don't spend 20 years of investigation and trial of a person, and then you put into some mechanism where after he's been jailed, he's now free. What does this speak of those who are open, to abuse of opportunities given to them by virtue of public office. So people who always say, well, we have failure of leadership, so we have failure of state, to some extent, they are justified to make these statements. But there are extremes. For example, when General Buhari in 1984 was the head of state, and they had this process against politicians who were at the helms of affairs from
The Second Republic.
Second Republic, yeah. People were being jailed 300 years, so many years. It looked as if it was not realistic. 300 years, and then you are still keeping the assets you stole or you are said to have earned corruptly. So there should be some realism in the system. There must be some commitment in the system. And there must be a focus to generally accepted values and ethics and codes.
Given what you've just said now about there must be a commitment and all of that, earlier on when you were giving the historical perspective and the background, you did mention you did mention that things were not like that, expectations were not that way. If you suddenly arrived with unidentified or unexplained wealth, there were questions asked and you were compelled by the system to explain, or you would then be taken to task over that matter.
Yes.
We dropped that along the way. But today, a lot of the criminality, what we're calling criminality, which has various names, banditry, kidnapping, and all of that, abductions of people, and all the rest of it, killings, murder, basically, of innocent people. Do they also speak to that, or is that a completely different strain now of the lack of consensus on what our values are?
Yeah, it is lack of consensus of on what our values are. Let me cite this example that has often been quoted. The powerful Sardauna of Sokoto as Premier of Northern Region. He used an aircraft of the Northern Region for a private function. The secretary in the office questioned him and sent him a bill to pay for the cost of that travel because it was a private function. Is that happening today? Can it happen in our recent experiences? It doesn't happen. But that's the issue of bureaucracy, accountability, and the conscience of the leader. And of course, he paid without murmurs. You know about it. He paid. Only to cite it as an example of how reliable the bureaucracy can be in protecting public assets.
At that time?
At that time, yes.
So, if I understand you well, what you're saying now is that one of the ways to tackle what we have currently as insecurity that you see is not by arming the armed forces better or providing more personnel and so on, but is to identify these two sets of essentially criminals,
yes,
and have the state arm itself to be able to tackle them. Am I along
yeah. You see, the criminality that we are experiencing now in the realms of security, the people who have become criminals today, the bandits, the cattle rustlers, and so on and so forth, they have been watching what their political leaders are doing with their wealth. They hold the wealth. You hold cattle, you hold land as a farmer, as a trader, and so on. You are holding the wealth. But you see people who are giving trust over that wealth emerging as a multi-palace owners, multi-property owners, and then those who work as civil servants or the bureaucrats or employees are not getting paid. And if they are paid, it's not sufficient to make a living. And if you are the educated, they are unemployed. So it's a challenge. It's a war between the distribution of the wealth of the nation among those who are privileged and given trust, and those who are just the, what you may call the donkeys or the horses, of the state. The state cannot fuse. This challenge is a challenge to the management of the resources, its control, its distribution, and its fairness in the system. That is one way of seeing it, so as to find how best to provide solution. Let people pay their taxes. Let those in leadership be regulated. Let everybody be accountable, right down to even the cattle owner. Let be accountable. They used to be accountable because the native people in those days were paying tax. On their farm produce, they are paying tax. On their animals, they are paying tax. You can say it was small because the economy had not been monetized. But they were paying. And they believed they had a right as such to be accounted for how their wealth has been used. But post-independence, post-Civil War times, people just suddenly wake up because of their connections. They become maybe billionaires, millionaires, with their assets not even in the country.
What you're saying now is possibly something that a lot of people have not thought about, talk less of even professing to talk about, in the sense of it being part of the solution to the problem of insecurity. Yeah. What people mostly have talked about is what I had mentioned earlier. More personnel for the police, more for the army, better arms, and so on and so forth. But this approach that you have given the fact that at the top you've got the federal government, you've got the states, then you've got the local governments at the very base of the existing political arrangement. All of these people are ideally elected representatives. How do they implement the kind of thing that you are saying? Because the other one is much simpler to do. The other one is much simpler to do. Get more people into the army, get more people into the police, provide more money for arms, and simply crush whoever it is that is identified as a criminal. It appears simpler.
It appears similar, but perpetuating the system of corruption and the corruptive circle. In the sense that, question the election. Who gets elected? On what values? And he transmits these values to the assembly. Do you remember at one time that members of the assembly going out on oversight will ask the subject institutions to provide hotel, provide tickets, provide a motor, and they will still claim on the public for the discharge of these duties. He will tell you he has to sustain his constituency. So the constituency expect their own share of the backwarding of corrupt income. No, I think to evolve a society where people feel they are equals before the law, they are equals in the society, they should be equal in the codes of conduct and values that sustain the Nigerian state.
But how do we do that? Because
but
now it has become...
we did it before.
It has become urgent now.
Look, I remember, for example, we are told that our founding fathers particularly those from the South, either had their petit traders back home sponsoring their further education to become lawyers, or that they stowed away and sacrificed so much and work as meanly as possible to raise their school fees and to graduate and come back to liberate Nigeria. So the present leaders, what values are they diffusing and impacting on the generation to come? It is because they are impacting this, either might is right or opportunity exploitation is right, that people who go and get degrees and belong to cabals, or what do they call them in colleges, these secret societies, societies, they expect to get on because they believe in these systems to succeed. So the system can work in their favor in bias reward system. I know this, I know that. He belongs to this society, he belongs to my society. He has to be given either this privilege or this contract and so on and so forth. It is reversible, but on the basis of what values. Because there are these societies in American universities and so on, but their purposes and methods are different. Because here I think that the purposes and the methods are so fundamental that they don't have values in them that accord peace and security for others. Again, it's a function of leadership that sustain or create these little pockets of, what do you call them now? When you send your son to school, they do initiation, okay. Cult. They call them cults.
Cults.
They call them cults. So there are subcultures that are inimical to the progress of society by the way they are going on in Nigeria. But I think in other jurisdictions, there are viable structures in carrying development, security. They are humanitarian in some places, and they engineer good social programs that encourage children to join them. In our own days, you join Boy Scouts or Boys Brigade. They're open. And you help society. So I think criminality, the kind we're having, there are people who feel that is their own way of getting things out of society. You see, we had nomadic education for Nigerians. I don't know whether the Fulanis felt associated with it or it has been in success, but a lot of money had been sunk in that policy. But the nomadic Fulani nowadays, I wonder whether they associate with any good tidings coming from government.
What you said now then just brings up the point that, okay, there's a linkage between this increasing criminality and the absence of opportunities, one. Two, those opportunities are absent because people who are supposed to take advantage of them also don't have access to education. Because as you were talking now about the fact that, you know, these people, do they associate with this? There was the question of the nomadic education scheme, the Almajiri schooling scheme, and so on. But till today, Nigeria still has the highest proportion of out-of-school children anywhere.
It's something that grows over time. And what question it raises is good governance. The principle of good governance will bring values, cooperation, synergy, patriotism, commitment to the nation. You will still have a proportion of people who may not believe in the main structure of things, and they form an opposition. But that is a matter of policy and programming. But the superstructure of what makes a Nigerian tick and is ready, if he's a soldier, to go and die for all other Nigerians. There must be. If you are a Muslim, you live in the way of a Muslim to the rules that have been descended to you. If you are Christian, the same thing. That is in the part of faith and religion. If you are a soldier, you must be made to believe like that. The ancient empires, they built their states on soldiers. At the initial, these soldiers were used that were completely severed from their family. After they have been taken into the combat or military services, they never belong to parents. They never belong to tribes. And even intermarrying or marrying and associating with the population in service, they were denied. The empires...
Even empires here also had that same policy. Even empires in what is now known as Nigeria had that same policy.
Yes.
But General, as we wind this down, because we're now out of time, I must then ask you, first, I want to understand that everything you've said so far, everything that's been raised so far in the interview, tends to devolve on the point that we can't solve the security challenge until we solve the challenge of the political system, which is what will lead us to good governance and which is what can then encourage us to deal with the security challenge. Have I gotten it in that form?
You raised the question, which comes first, the egg or the chicken?
Yes.
Who makes the egg? Who makes the chicken? Which one comes first?
Good question, but I
well,
guess...
let me, in my own thing, yes. The egg and chicken come together. But there are people who got together to make the egg and the chicken. Again, who are the procreators or the creators? In our present day, we are creating and evolving a generation that will come after us. We may have gotten it wrong from January 1966, but we have opportunities, and we still have opportunities to think about how to remold our present environment of society, economic development, social and political interests. We still have time. We still have years ahead of us. But the present people, in their short-term thinking, must be thinking, what is the viability of a peaceful, progressive, viable, free, and fair election so that government and the governed and good governance may prevail for another period of re-examination. And
you don't think they will be thinking that way?
Yeah, they are thinking that way, but in different contexts. For example, let's say the Igbo man is thinking that way, that we can have a feasible and a viable democracy if an Igbo man becomes a president. But he's not going to be president of Igbo people. He's going to be president of Nigeria. He must ascend what the decree said, the first citizens, they are idiots. They are very selfish people. That's according to the Greek philosopher. The second one, I don't know what he said, they are selfish. It's only when you get to the third level that you have citizens who see themselves as belonging to a state of being that incorporates everybody and incorporates the so-called primitive idiots and the the elite group and so on, and the citizens. So it is an evolution. I don't think it is a bang, explosive situation that brings a democratic society into being. America, the foremost of democratic nations, the pride of nations, we see today is still feeling the challenges, of allowing what has transpired as free and fair election for succession to take place. They are having their own attempts of a coup. And what happens after a coup is martial order. So we should be patient. We should get to know ourselves, our different interests, and have some consensus of what is not only good for us, but good for the citizenry, and is good for civilized progress of humanity.
General Haruna, it's been a pleasure having you with us this time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's Newsnight. Thanks for being with us. Do let us know what you think of the issues raised by getting in touch using the various social media handles on your screen. I'm Ladi Akeredoluale. Goodbye.